Welcome to this focused examination of the source material you shared with us. Our mission today is pretty straightforward.
Mm.
We're going to explore a really densely packed stack of sources centered on one of the most unique and I think often misunderstood subcultures operating today, the furry fandom.
We have been given a unique opportunity here for sure.
Yeah.
The materials you provided, they allow for a chance to conduct a clear, impartial analysis.
Which is rare.
It's very rare for this community. It's usually viewed through, a distorted lens from sensationalist media. Our task is really to move beyond all of that.
Exactly. The popular perception so often fixates on just one thing, the costumes, or these outdated, sensationalized anecdotes.
Right.
But the academic research and the articles you shared, they reveal a complex, highly organized, and really creative social structure.
And that's our goal here. It's comprehensive. We want to synthesize the history, the core activities, the sociological profile, the demographics, and also that challenging public perception.
All of it.
All of it. By the time we finish this exploration, you should be thoroughly and quickly informed, but grounded only in the substantial data that's presented in these sources.
So let's unpack this. We're moving from conjecture to concrete reality.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's begin with the timeline. Because when you look at the origins, the interest in these types of characters, it actually predates the formal fandom label by decades.
It does.
What fictional works do the sources repeatedly point to as the early, the seminal inspirations for this community?
The sources are quite specific on this. They often cite global fictional works that the fans themselves acknowledge were the sparks for their interest. This is long before any organized conventions existed.
Right.
And these works really resonated because they featured animals that were endowed with, complex human morality and psychology.
And which ones stand out the most frequently in the material?
Three major examples consistently appear. First, we have Kimba, the white lion.
From the 60s.
Yeah, it began as a manga in the 1950s and was later adapted into that influential animated series in 1965.
Okay.
Then there is the really powerful novel Watership Down by Richard Adams, published in 72.
And the film adaptation.
And its intensely allegorical 1978 film adaptation, which is, it left a mark on a lot of people.
Watership Down is a perfect example of how complex and often very dark themes can be explored using anthropomorphic characters.
Precisely. It's not simply animals wearing clothes. It's about existential dread. It's about social hierarchy, political allegory.
The heavy stuff.
It's very heavy. And the third major touchstone is Disney's Robin Hood.
A classic.
Yeah, which uses those classic, expressive anthropomorphic designs to tell a beloved historical fantasy story. These examples, featuring animals behaving with human complexity, they really help create the emotional and creative foundation for everything that came later.
So those were the inspirational sources. When did this appreciation stop being just an individual interest and actually coalesce into an organized fandom?
That transition, you can trace it directly to the very tight-knit world of sci-fi and comic book fandom in the mid to late 1970s and early 80s.
Okay, so it grew out of that scene.
It did. The sources indicate the earliest formalized group was established in 1976 when two cartoonists, Ken Fletcher and Reed Waller, launched an amateur press association called Voodie.
An amateur press association, that's a very analog, pre-internet way of building a community. What was Voodie's initial focus?
It was dedicated specifically to the discussion and circulation of animal-focused art and prose. Now, it is critical for historical context to note that many of the featured works, they contained adult or mature themes.
So this is where we see that early thread of complexity regarding sexuality start to appear.
Absolutely. The famous comic Omaha, the Cat Dancer, which explicitly integrated adult themes and sexuality right into its storyline, was a major focus of this early association.
Well, that was there from the beginning.
It was. This suggests that the discussions and the artistic output of this core group were already exploring mature themes long before the internet came along and amplified those elements.
Right.
And the contributors and followers of Voodie, they started meeting physically at existing science fiction conventions.
That sets the stage for the organizational birth. But the actual moment the concept of furry was defined is a very specific anecdote involving a piece of art, right?
It is. Fandom historian Fred Patton is cited in the sources, and he pins the concept's origin to a science fiction convention in 1980. The spark was a character drawing from Steve Gallacci's comic, Albedo Anthropomorphics.
And what was it about that drawing that that ignited the whole movement.
It catalyzed a dedicated discussion. People started talking about anthropomorphic characters in sci-fi novels and art in a way that was distinct from the general sci-fi topics.
So it carved out its own space.
Exactly. That single drawing led directly to the formation of a continuing discussion group that then met at subsequent large conventions. And this ongoing focused discussion group is the widely accepted genesis of the organized fandom.
So the conversation starts in 1980. When did they actually settle on the name Furry Fandom?
Well, the term furry fandom was already in use in fanzines by 1983. But it took until the mid-1990s to really become the standardized, formalized term.
Okay.
And by that point, it was defined in the growing literature as, and I'm quoting here, the organized appreciation and dissemination of art and prose regarding furries, or fictional mammalian anthropomorphic characters.
And this movement gained enough momentum that it needed its own dedicated space away from the broader sci-fi conventions.
Yes. By 1989, there was sufficient interest to stage the first purely furry convention. It was called Conference Zero, held in Costa Mesa, California.
And that must have been a major shift.
It was huge. It marked the moment they went from being a discussion group within larger existing fan cultures to being a self-sustaining, distinct gathering community.
This is the moment where the environment changes completely. The shift to the internet. It must have fundamentally changed how they socialized, grew, and distributed their art.
The internet was transformative. Because the fandom was so geographically dispersed and highly dependent on visual art, once digital communication became accessible in the 90s, it just rapidly became the most popular means for communication and artistic exchange.
Right.
In November 1990, the Usenet news group alt.fan.furry was created, and that provided a global message board for them.
Newsgroups were great for discussion, but the research points out that they were really early adopters of virtual worlds for role-playing and for identity. And this seems key to understanding the community's persistent nature.
Absolutely. They needed a persistent interactive space, not just a message board. And this led to the rise of multi-user shared habitats, or MUSHs, and multi-user chat systems, or MUCKs.
Text-based virtual worlds.
Entirely text-based. And they facilitated this intricate, continuous role-playing.
What's fascinating about these MUCKs is just the level of commitment they required from early internet users.
Oh, an intense investment in both text description and time. The environment itself was built with text. Users had to type out their actions, their descriptions of their characters.
Wow.
The longest-running example cited is Furry MUCK, established way back in 1990. Another popular online furry social game mentioned is Furcadia, which added graphical elements later on.
In these environments, they provided these dedicated, persistent spaces where fans could fully embody their fursonas.
Yes, and interact globally. It completely overcame the barriers of physical distance and the cost of travel.
This allowed identity exploration to move from something you do in a sketchbook to something that was, lived out in a shared digital world.
Exactly. It moved the experience from passive appreciation to active, sustained engagement in world building. And that dramatically deepened the sense of community inclusion.
Now, connecting back to that initial thread we saw in Voodoo, the sources mention a fascinating detail about terminology debates in the early 90s, specifically an attempt to sort of split the community's identity.
Yes, the discussions on alt.fan.furry in the early 1990s, they revealed an internal attempt by some fans to establish a clear separation.
What were they trying to separate?
They tried to distinguish between furry characters, which they saw as having more complex adult or sexual undertones, and funny animal characters, which they defined as purely cartoonish and family-friendly.
And what was the motivation for this split?
It was a conscious effort to avoid the baggage that was already becoming associated with the term furry.
So even back then?
Even back then.
Huh.
The distinction was sought because a number of people recognized that the community, even in its early online days, contained a subset that was very focused on the sexuality of their fictitious characters.
So, even at the very dawn of online furry culture, the community was grappling internally with how the topic of sexuality would shape and potentially overshadow their public identity. This tension has been present from the very start.
It's a vital historical footnote. It proves that the community was aware of the potential for misrepresentation from the beginning, and it attempted to curate its own image, even if those efforts didn't fully stick.
And the digital world just amplified everything.
It amplified the community, but it also amplified the internal tensions and the visibility of those adult elements.
Okay, moving on to the modern activities and the creative output. The sources clarified that the fandom is extremely diverse, but there are certain core activities that really define the culture.
Based on research from 2008, 4 key areas stand out as the pillars of activity and engagement:
Okay.
visual art, conventions, literature, and online communities. These are not merely hobbies, they are the structured ways in which the subculture maintains and propels itself.
And the most immediate, high-impact manifestation of this output is, without a doubt, the fursuit. It's the defining visual representation for any outsider looking in.
The fursuit is the pinnacle of creative expression for many, yes. These are elaborate, often full-body costumes.
What are they used for?
They're worn for socializing, for participating in parades, convention events like masquerades and dances, or, importantly, for fundraising charity events as entertainers. The craftsmanship required is substantial.
We're not talking about simple Halloween costumes here. What kind of construction complexity are we analyzing in the sources?
We're discussing professional-grade artistry. These complex constructions can include things like internal padding for realistic body shapes,
Right.
moving jaw mechanisms that are synchronized with the wearer's voice, sophisticated animatronic features like blinking eyes, and advanced prosthetic makeup for a realistic facial structure.
And that complexity directly correlates with cost, which I understand is substantial.
Indeed. The sources indicate that fursuits represent a serious financial investment. They can range from around $500 for a simpler partial suit or mascot-like design,
Okay.
up to $10,000 or more for complex, custom, high-end models that incorporate advanced electronics and realistic features.
So it's a real cottage industry.
It is. This high cost has fostered a cottage industry of professional suit makers right within the fandom.
Given that eye-watering cost, the statistics on ownership are critical for dismantling the public stereotype.
They are crucial. The research states unequivocally that the majority of furries, about 80%, do not own a full fursuit.
80%.
80. The most common form of costuming is actually a partial suit, which might just consist of ears, a tail, a head, or even just paws and a tail.
But when you see the huge fursuit parade videos from the conventions, it gives the complete opposite impression.
That's a function of self-selection. Researchers surveyed attendees at Anthrocon in 2018 and found that 45% of the attendees owned a full or partial suit.
Okay, so a much higher percentage of people at the con.
Much higher. And the researchers offered a very logical explanation. If a fan can afford the significant expense of traveling to a major convention, they are generally also more likely to have the discretionary income available to afford a fursuit.
That makes sense.
The presence of a suit at a convention is linked to financial ability, not universal participation.
And beyond the static art and the full-body costuming, the community also creates professional media.
Yes, they engage in high-quality creative output like puppetry and professional streaming shows.
Any examples?
The sources cite Rapid T. Rabbit and Friends, and notably the Fun Day Pawpet Show, which uses puppetry and live video streaming. They also create commercial accessories like standalone ears, tails, and paws that cater to that large segment of the fandom who wear only partial gear.
Let's pivot to the identity structure. The concept of the fursona seems foundational to this community. It acts as an anthropomorphic animal representation, or avatar.
It's the most universal practice in the fandom. More than 95% of furries create one. The fursona is how fans roleplay in those online MUDs and MUCKs we talked about, and it's how they define their presence in forums and on social media. It is, at its core, an identity tool.
Does the fursona remain stable, or do people change species often?
The stability is quite high, which suggests a deep connection. Nearly half of furries report having only ever had one fursona, and the majority of those who do change do so very infrequently.
What does it represent for them?
It often represents an idealized version of themselves, or maybe a trait they wish to explore.
Are there favored species? And does that choice reflect deep psychological differences?
Statistically, the majority, over 60% in one survey, choose to identify with carnivores.
Like what?
The most popular species are wolves, foxes, dogs, large felines, and dragons.
Ah,
However, and this is where the sociological research offers a compelling insight,
okay.
researchers found that there is, and I quote, generally no association between personality traits and different fursona species.
That's a crucial distinction. It implies that the choice of species is more aesthetic or symbolic rather than reflecting, say, all wolf fursonas being introverted.
Exactly. The choice is driven by factors like aesthetics, mythology, or the perceived cultural symbolism of the animal, not by a direct mapping to real-world psychological metrics.
Right.
So someone might choose a dragon because they admire its symbolic power and scale, not because they feel biologically reptilian. The persona is a symbolic container for identity, not a psychological diagnosis.
Let's look at the physical gatherings. Conventions are central to their social structure, and they carry a significant economic weight.
The growth of conventions has been exponential. Midwest Fur Fest, held annually, is currently cited as the world's largest. It boasted an attendance of 11,019 people in 2019.
That's a huge number.
It is. And Anthrocon, another giant in the space, generates significant local revenue. For example, Anthrocon 2008 was estimated to generate approximately $3 million for Pittsburgh's economy.
$3 million from one gathering. That just underscores the stability and the commitment of this community, and they also have a strong, often overlooked focus on philanthropy.
This is a vital counterpoint to the negative media portrayals. The research highlights the community's philanthropic focus. Between 2000 and 2009, these conventions collectively raised $470,000 for various charities.
And what kind of charities?
Often focusing on animal welfare or humanitarian causes. This organized charity effort really shows the positive, outward-looking aspect of the community structure.
We should also acknowledge the internal recognition they have for high-quality work. The sources mentioned the Ursa Major Award.
The Ursa Major Award is essentially the fandom's highest honor. It recognizes excellence in anthropomorphic works across categories like literature, comics, and film. It serves as a form of peer review and internal legitimization for the art form.
And the list of recent winners in the audiovisual category is, well, it's highly indicative of the kind of complex, diverse media that resonates with or is produced by the community.
The list is very contemporary and critically recognized. It features titles such as Haluva Boss, Beasters, B&A, Brand New Animal, Centaur World, Agretsuko, Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts, and Odd Taxi. What's notable, as the sources point out, is that some of these series, like Haluva Boss and Kipo, also prominently feature LGBT characters.
And that reflects the internal diversity of the fandom itself.
Yes, and the acceptance of varied themes and representations within the media they choose to celebrate.
Now we arrive at the core question. Who are these individuals? You provided access to data from the International Anthropomorphic Research Project, or IARP. This research is invaluable because it replaces decades of media guesswork with hard sociological data.
This IARP data, particularly from 2016, offers a really robust profile. It allows us to analyze demographics, educational attainment, and most importantly, the psychological nuances of identity and community affiliation.
Let's start with the hard numbers. What about age and educational attainment?
The community is decidedly youth-driven. The average adult furry surveyed is quite young, aged between 23 and 27 years old.
Okay.
Overall, 88% of the adult furries surveyed are under the age of 30.
And what about minors?
Well, the study ethically excluded minors, but the IRP researchers estimate that minors constitute about 20% of the total fandom population.
And on the metric of education, this is a highly engaged and academically successful group.
Extremely so. The data shows that approximately 70% of adult furries have either completed or are currently completing post-secondary education, so college or vocational training.
That's a very high rate compared to the general population.
It is. It suggests a group that values intellectual curiosity and technical skill,
which provides a direct connection to the widely observed professional leanings of the community.
Precisely. The sources mention the persistent observation that members of the furry community are, quote, overrepresented in the IT industry. They often hold senior, technically skilled, or otherwise important positions. And this is likely a correlation of several factors: high educational attainment, a comfort level with systems and logic, and the fact that the fandom itself grew on the back of early internet infrastructure.
That strong presence in technology is what gave rise to that lighthearted suggestion that furries run the internet.
It's more than a joke. It's a reflection of their demographic advantage in the digital age. They are native to the virtual spaces they helped build. Their high comfort with virtual identities and their technical proficiency made them early pioneers. And that aptitude translates directly into professional success in the tech sector.
Let's look at gender and sexual orientation. The makeup here is significantly different from the general population.
It is. It's marked by a clear divergence from cisgender and heterosexual norms. The community is predominantly male, with about 67% identifying as male and 23% as female.
But the key statistics lie in the non-cisgender identification.
That's right. 2% identified as transgender and 10% identified as genderqueer or non-binary.
12% identifying outside the cisgender binary is a massive overrepresentation. What does this suggest about the community?
It strongly suggests that the fandom operates as a self-selecting, highly supportive, and potentially protective space for gender and sexual exploration.
A safe space.
Yes, it provides a community where non-traditional identities are accepted,
Yeah.
and the ability to adopt a non-human avatar may facilitate exploration of gender identity without the external pressure of physical appearance.
When we look at political and religious leanings, they also deviate significantly from the American average.
The group overall is characterized as being more politically liberal and less religious than the average American or even comparable fan groups like anime fans. Their worldview is generally progressive.
Can you break down the religious self-identification for us?
The plurality,
Yeah.
at 23.5%, self-identified as Christian. However, this is immediately followed by substantial groups identifying as atheist at 16.8% and agnostic also at 16.8%.
And there's another significant group.
Yes, 11% identified as pagan or Wiccan. The low overall religious adherence and the high percentage of those identifying outside traditional structures, it really speaks to the group's general independent worldview and non-traditional alignment.
Here is where the data becomes truly fascinating. The concepts of identity and belongingness. The sources indicate this is far more than just a casual hobby for people.
Inclusion is absolutely central. When you compare them with members of other fan groups, furries are significantly more likely to identify with other members of their community.
How much more?
On average, the sources indicate that fully half of a furry's friends are also furries.
Wow.
This points to a very deep level of social immersion. The community serves as a primary, if not exclusive, social support structure for many.
And the scope of their identity extends beyond their immediate social circle, connecting them to global and environmental issues.
Researchers compared furries to non-furry control groups and found that furries consistently rated themselves higher on metrics of global awareness, global citizenship identification, and environmental sustainability.
Which makes a certain kind of sense.
It does. It suggests a collective profile that is generally empathetic, globally conscious, and concerned with the natural world, which aligns logically with their deep interest in animal figures.
We must address the complex idea of non-human identification. This is often the point that is most widely misunderstood by the media.
This requires careful nuance. The data shows a profound internal divergence from baseline human identity. 35% of furries say they do not feel 100% human.
And how does that compare?
In contrast, only 7% of the non-furry control group reported the same feeling. Even more strikingly, 39% of furries reported they would be 0% human if they could, compared to just 10% of non-furries.
That is a fundamental difference in self-perception. It suggests that for a large and significant subset of the fandom, the interest in anthropomorphic animals extends into a psychological or spiritual identification, far beyond just appreciating the art.
Yes, and this is why the distinction between the fandom itself and what emerged as the furry lifestyle is so important to clarify.
That distinction arose in the mid-1990s as a way to manage internal expectations.
Correct. The terms fandom versus lifestyle appeared in 1996 discussions on alt.fan.furry as members sought to resolve internal disputes about what behaviors and beliefs should be associated with the community.
Right.
The lifestylers adopted a more deeply spiritual or emotional definition of being a furry.
And how did they define that lifestyle?
They adopted an alternative definition of the word furry, specific to this group. It was, quote, a person with an important emotional spiritual connection with an animal or animals, real, fictional, or symbolic.
That's a much deeper definition.
It implies a much deeper, more identity-based commitment than merely enjoying art.
So, using the IRRP research, how does the community break down into these different modes of identity? Is it mostly lifestylers or is it mostly socializers?
The research proposed a taxonomy of furries based on their core motivations. The largest group, comprising 38% of those surveyed, described their interest predominantly as a route to socializing with others who share common interests, such as anthropomorphic art and costumes.
So that's the highly social core, the hobbyists.
That's right. But the taxonomy also validates the existence of those with deeper connections.
Okay.
The study identified significant subgroups, including those who genuinely desired to become more like the specific species with which they identified, or who saw themselves as other than human.
So it's a very big tent.
It is. This accommodation of diverse psychological needs within a single community structure is a hallmark of the fandom. It demonstrates that the community is a composite of individuals with motivations ranging from simple creativity and socializing to profound identity exploration and spiritual self-discovery. Now, we must approach a topic that has disproportionately dominated public discussion of the fandom: sexuality. And we need to handle this factually and neutrally, relying exclusively on the provided data to separate fact from sensationalism.
This is critical because this aspect is often the only one the media chooses to focus on. Let's look at the research regarding alternative sexualities first. That's a key demographic finding.
The data reveals high rates of non-heterosexual identities compared to the general population. Multiple large-scale surveys consistently show rates of bisexuality ranging from 37 to 52%.
And homosexuality.
And homosexuality ranging from 14 to 25%. If we combine the non-cisgender identity findings from the previous section with these sexual orientation statistics, the picture of the fandom as a safe harbor for marginalized identities becomes much, much clearer.
And the social implication is reinforced by their relationship patterns.
It is. The community is highly endogamous socially. 76% of those in a relationship reported being with another member of the furry fandom.
So they date within the community.
Overwhelmingly. This strong rate of internal coupling further illustrates the power of the community as a social and romantic support network. It provides safety and a shared understanding that might be lacking outside the fandom.
But how central is sexual interest to the fandom's activities overall? Is the community defined by it?
The research indicates that while sexual interest is definitely present for a segment, it is far from universal or defining for everyone.
What are the numbers?
In one large survey, 37% of respondents reported that sexual attraction is important to their furry activities. However, 38% were ambivalent or neutral.
And the rest.
And 24%, nearly a quarter, responded that it has little or nothing to do with their furry activities.
So roughly 2/3 of the community are either ambivalent or non-sexually focused in their furry activities. This strongly counters that media narrative.
It does. It confirms the community is not exclusively defined by this one aspect, but rather accommodates it alongside the core creative and social activities. The sources also mention the term YIF.
Can you clarify the usage of that term, keeping in mind our commitment to sensitive, factual reporting?
Certainly. YIF is a specific term sometimes used within the community to indicate sexual activity or erotic material involving anthropomorphic characters.
And what does that entail?
This can refer to commissioned erotic art, role-playing cybersex, or offline sexual interactions between members of the subculture. The existence of the term merely reflects that erotic expression is a recognized, though not universal, element of the fandom's output.
We must now address the most persistent and damaging misconception, which is the conflation of the furry fandom with zoophilia or bestiality. We need to analyze the data carefully here, as the sources present some conflicting historical findings.
This is perhaps the most sensitive area, and we have to proceed with caution and clarity. The sources acknowledge that negative media portrayals have historically conflated the fandom with zoophilia or bestiality, and we must stress the data-driven clarification here.
Let's start with the historical data.
Older face-to-face surveys showed extremely low interest in zoophilia, about 2%.
But there's a reason for that low number.
Yes, it was sometimes attributed to social desirability bias, where respondents are reluctant to admit taboo behaviors in a non-anonymous setting.
And then the data changed when anonymity was introduced.
Yes. A later anonymous survey in 2008, specifically designed to reduce that social desirability bias, found a higher self-reporting figure, with 17% identifying as zoophiles.
So a much higher number.
It's a significant jump, and it's critical to understand. It likely reflects greater honesty in an anonymous setting rather than a sudden explosion of interest. It reveals the presence of this interest within the broader online community, but it does not represent the accepted norms of the fandom organization.
That conflicting data is confusing for a learner. What does the most recent analysis tell us about the community's boundaries today?
It is essential to focus on the contemporary organizational stance. The source material clearly states that more recent sources consider both bestiality and zoophilia taboo in the furry fandom.
So it's not accepted.
It's not.
Yeah.
This indicates a strong, enforced boundary within the modern subculture itself. The leadership and the majority of the community actively work to distinguish artistic appreciation of anthropomorphized characters, which is fantasy from art depicting sexual activity with real animals, which is bestiality.
So the community itself is actively working to police its own boundaries against this negative stereotype.
Precisely. They recognize that this conflation is the single most damaging stereotype, and the official stance is rejection of those behaviors. The fact that the most recent research confirms the taboo demonstrates an internal social evolution toward greater acceptance and mainstreaming of their own unique identity, separate from harmful, illegal associations.
Let's discuss how early media coverage contributed to the persistence of these negative stereotypes.
Early media coverage, particularly from publications like Vanity Fair and cable television shows like CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, or The Drew Carey Show,
Right.
they concentrated almost solely on the sexual or fetishistic aspect. This early sensationalized focus created a false public narrative that overshadowed the community's creative, social, and philanthropic components.
And the fans felt this acutely.
Yes, most furry fans strongly claimed these media portrayals were gross misconceptions. Their long-standing belief that they would be portrayed as mainly obsessed with sex led to significant distrust of both the media and social researchers who weren't affiliated with the IARP project.
But the narrative has evolved, hasn't it? More recent reporting has shown more balance.
Thankfully, yes. There's been a gradual shift toward more nuanced reporting. A reporter attending Anthrocon in 2006, for example, publicly confirmed that the convention was not the scene of kinky sex, the media often implied,
But what was it?
but rather was, quote, people talking and drawing animals and comic book characters in sketchbooks. This shift toward validating the creative and social aspects has led to more balanced, if slower, public understanding.
There was also a notable positive interaction that garnered widespread attention in 2016.
This happened in Vancouver. A furry convention was held in the same hotel complex where several Syrian refugee children and their families were being temporarily housed.
An interesting situation.
Yes, and despite initial concerns about a negative culture clash, the reality was entirely positive. The refugee children were reportedly delighted to meet the convention-goers, especially those in the elaborate fursuits. It generated heartwarming, positive coverage and showed the innocent, lighthearted side of the costuming culture.
Finally, we must address the most damaging and recently visible false rumors. The political weaponization of the furry stereotype that circulated widely just a few years ago.
You were referring to the completely fabricated litter boxes in schools hoax. It gained massive traction in 2021 and 2022 across the U.S. and Canada.
And the sources are clear on this.
Completely clear. It was a baseless rumor, incorrectly claiming that schools were accommodating students identifying as animals by providing litter boxes in bathrooms.
And the context of the rumor, which made it so damaging, wasn't about the fandom at all.
The sources state that this hoax was weaponized as part of a broader cultural and political backlash. It was often amplified by politicians seeking to undermine accommodations for marginalized students, specifically targeting policies related to transgender accommodations in schools.
So the fandom was just used as a tool.
The misinformation incorrectly and maliciously tied the furry fandom to this controversy, using the stereotype as a tool for fear-mongering.
It is truly unfortunate to see a community targeted by such baseless and widespread misinformation. It caused real stress and harm to those targeted. The sources make it unequivocally clear that this was entirely fabricated, yet it became a major political talking point.
It serves as a profound modern example of how easily a complex subculture can be twisted into harmful stereotypes and weaponized when misinformation is spread without verification. The community's existing struggle with public perception made it an easy, though innocent, target. So, in synthesizing all the knowledge we've discussed today, we can clearly delineate the profile of the furry fandom. It is a creative, educated, highly social, and often politically liberal subculture.
That's right.
It's built upon a shared, deep interest in anthropomorphic characters, and it is a community that has spent decades struggling against persistent and damaging media misconceptions to solidify its identity.
We've covered the history, the art, the strong economics, and the nuanced demographics. But what is the final, perhaps most insightful piece of knowledge from the IRRP research that we need to spend time on? The statistic that suggests a deeper function for this community.
The most profound finding relates to neurodiversity and the fandom's function as a potential haven. Research based in Pittsburgh found a staggering statistic.
What was it?
Up to 15% of furries may be autistic, which is a massive overrepresentation compared with the estimated 1 to 2% in the general population.
15%. That is a huge correlation. What does this suggest about the community's structural function and its appeal?
The data strongly suggests that the fandom serves a vital social and psychological role for neurodivergent individuals. For people on the autism spectrum, or those with related neurodiversities, the fandom offers a few key advantages. It provides a community based on clear, shared, intense creative interests.
And the use of the fursona and the fursuit likely plays a role in simplifying social interaction.
Absolutely. The fursona acts as a predefined identity, an avatar that comes with clear, shared behavioral rules. This can make social interaction less ambiguous and thus less stressful.
I see.
The use of elaborate costumes, ironically, helps strip away the complexities of real-world physical and social interaction by replacing it with a structured fantasy persona.
Right.
The community's overall high degree of acceptance for those who feel other in the general population, combined with its structure, provides a powerful and safe harbor.
That is a powerful final thought. That this unique social structure, created around art and fantasy, ultimately functions as a place of genuine and profound comfort and acceptance for a segment of the population that often faces social difficulties elsewhere. The fandom is not just a collection of artists and role players, it is a self-made social ecosystem for those seeking belonging.
It reframes the entire discussion. It moves the focus from spectacle to sanctuary. And it shows the real-world application of fantasy in supporting emotional and social well-being.
That wraps up this thorough exploration of the source material you provided. Thanks for listening.